Welcome to Meguiar's Car Crazy. It doesn't matter if you're a guy or gal, if you love cars, you're a car guy. And this is Car Crazy Central, shouting the passion that 30 million of us who are car guys across America and tens of millions more around the world share in common, no matter what kind of cars we love. Join us as we focus on this emotion of being car crazy. Welcome to Car Crazy Central, ground zero for monitoring the major events and personalities of the car hobby around the world. Each week, we creatively serve up a full menu of car crazy passion for you to enjoy via our Car Crazy television and radio shows, as well as on demand through our website, carcrazycentral.com. Our mission is pure and simple. That's right, we want to make you just a little more
Sid Barrett, suddenly, he'd been holding a blues album with two players on it, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. He just said, let's be Pink Floyd. So that was it. I have to say, Birdcage Maserati, terrific car, and I had a great, for me, it was one of the best races I ever had. Won the race on the last corner of the last lap. Mainly because the car was so good. I've led a particularly fortunate life, that I've had these two things that I've been able to really, indulge in, really.
You really have.
And one supported the other.
Yeah.
And now our host, Barry Meguiar.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another very special edition of Meguiar's Car Crazy, coming today from London, England, with my buddy Nick Mason, who, of course, we know is the drummer for Pink Floyd. I know as a car guy, and this is our world where we come in contact, and we met up 4 years ago or something at Goodwood, and I walked away and said, we have to do a feature with you because you express this passion for cars, and the way you express it about as well as anybody I've ever heard.
Well, I've led a particularly fortunate life, that I've had these two things that I've been able to really, indulge in, really.
You really have.
And one supported the other.
Yeah. Your passion for music and your passion for cars, I know they cross over. Each influences the other. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, to be honest, I quite often change my response to that, because you can find similarities. There are ways that they overlap, and there are other times where they're so different that they almost work because they're so different. That,
really?
Because I think particularly motor racing, it's absolutely decided on the track. It's nothing to do with what your audience think of you or people telling you you're wonderful. You see exactly where you stand in the whole thing. But then there are other similarities that is almost like learning a piece of music. It's enormously helpful to remember whether it turns left or right, just as it is to...
Help me remember, when did Pink Floyd come together?
1967, really. I mean, we were students together. We were all going to be architects in 1963.
Really?
Yeah, and it was really a college band that sort of took off from there.
Just blown the charts. You have so many records. Your albums have just been so sensational and stayed in the top of the charts for years after years after years.
Yeah, well, Dark Side in particular was curious because it's been around the charts for so long. It never quite got the award for the Platinum Award. It was always a gold race.
How do you describe the music that Pink Floyd did?
Well, I think all of us try very, very hard not to categorise ourselves, because you want people to make their own decisions about where you stand in that respect. But the other thing is, of course, after a sort of fairly lengthy career, the music, in a way, has been through a number of different genres. What we did in 1967 is actually not what we did in 73, and what we did in the early 80s is different again. So I think well, hopefully, we've progressed. That sounds like progressive rock.
You're transgenerational rock, I'll say that, because you're not pigeonholed in one age group.
The idea of rock and roll was absolutely to do with young people. It was something that kids did, and they had, and then they grew up and they moved on and did something else. What's so curious is that the music has become there's now a library of rock and roll, and the kids are as interested in what happened in the 60s as what's happening now. So it was something none of us really understood at the time. I have to say, I assumed I'd have a proper job by now, and it just hasn't happened.
When did the name Pink Floyd get applied, and how did that happen?
66. We weren't professional, but we were doing sort of part-time gigs, and we were called the Tea Set, I think, at the time. And we arrived to do this show and discovered the band on before us were also called the Tea Set, so we needed a new name quite quickly.
That's fun.
And Sid Barrett, suddenly, he'd been holding a blues album with two players on it, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. And he just said, let's be Pink Floyd. So,
My gracious, my gracious.
That was it.
That's a great story. Paul Harvey in the United States would say, now you know the rest of the story. Back with more of our car crazy friends right after this break. Welcome back to Meguiar's Car Crazy, here with Nick Mason, the drummer for Pink Floyd, talking about cars. Started for you, I'm always saying, right, train kids when they're young, get them exposed to cars when they're young. That happened to you naturally because of your dad.
Yeah, my father was a film director for the Shell Film Unit, which was the petrol company, and they had their own film unit who was sent out to make films about the sort of things that Shell did. So he ended up making films about Le Mans, about the Mille Miglia, and then eventually he made a whole series of films, which was a history of motorsport.
When you think back to those days, some of the first things are like, wow, this is really cool.
Well, for me, of course, it was very much to do with, you know, sort of having time with my dad, because he used to race himself, and he raced a vintage Bentley. So I saw the cars, a couple of which I own now.
Now, you never fancied yourself to be a collector. You never set out to say, I'm going to amass a great collection of cars. That was never...
No, I sort of fell into that because the plan was always to have a car in order to use it. And so once I started motor racing, the whole thing was about having a car that could be raced. And I assumed that I would then be selling that and moving on to something else. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending upon how you see these things, the music business came up. Ended up racing later than I would have done, perhaps. But on the other hand, I didn't ever have to sell the cars.
Yeah, so this worked pretty well. The first car you bought was
Austin 7.
Austin, okay.
Austin 7 Chummy,
there we go.
Which is a really simple, tiny engine, 750cc. Cost me, well, $40. It was a great opportunity to learn something about car engineering, because most of it you could take off by hand. You didn't need engine hoists, you just had to pick it out of the car.
That first racing experience, help us put in perspective with your music career.
73, and that was a pre-war Aston Martin. Okay. I fell in with a wonderful guy called Derek Edwards. He just got me racing. I mean, there were no race schools at the time. He just said, right, we go out, you follow me around, I'll show you the way around. You know. In fact, that was the car I raced at Laguna.
You came to the Monterey Historics this year. You're on the lawn at Pebble Beach with your Ferrari.
It was a great outing.
GTO,
I really enjoyed it. I've had my Ferrari GTO now for 30 years, something like that. Every time, as you approach the car, you enjoy what it looks like, and then you climb into it and you look over the bonnet, and you enjoy that as well. I mean, it's not something you get tired of.
That was your first experience in total. You'd not been there before.
The historics were terrific fun.
I suspect you'll be back.
I certainly hope so.
Well, you want to talk about all your cars, because I mean, you have so many great cars, from the 250F Maserati to the Birdcage to the Bugatti race car to the Bernard, the 1901 Bernard. We're going to talk about all those and how he found each one of them right after this break. Welcome back to Meguiar's Car Crazy. We're here with Nick Mason in London, England. Of course, Nick being the drummer for Pink Floyd, and one of the greatest car guys I've ever spoken to, the way you speak it, and the cars you've amassed, of course. Let's talk about your cars a little bit, man. It's just, how many cars in total are we talking about in your collection now?
Well, it is a movable feast. I mean, at one point it had got to over 40, and now it's probably sort of 35, 36.
Picked several cars that you've had, why you picked them and restored them and then raced them. We can't go into all of them, obviously, but I know there's certain ones that are really dear to you.
I have to say Birdcage Maseratis. Sounds rather spoiled, but I actually have two. I have the 2-litre car and the 3-litre car. One car was a restoration project, bought the bits, started assembling it. I got to the point where I was so frustrated at not driving it, I bought another one that was ready to go and broke that almost immediately, and then had to revert back to the 2-litre. Terrific car, and I had a great, you know, for me it was one of the best races I ever had, which was a support race for a Grand Prix, where I won the race on the last corner of the last lap. I mean, mainly because the car was so good. I mean,
was that your most thrilling racing experience?
It was certainly one of them, but you can have thrilling races in any car. That's the great thing. You don't actually have to be in the latest Ferrari. You can be in a De Chevaux Citroën, and it's great. But for me, going to Le Mans probably was the most important thing, because it was... that had always been the sort of goal of where I'd like to get to. Was, you know, you're actually racing against your heroes. It's the oldest car I've got is a 1901 Panhard, but which is a London to Brighton runner. We think it was originally a racing car. It has all the sort of good bits on it that suggest that it was.
It's quite fast, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's quite frightening, and has virtually no brakes.
For that era.
Yeah. It's interesting because it was the year that cars suddenly became more sophisticated. You know, it's got a four-cylinder engine, it's got a steering wheel, and it's no longer got a racing body on it. In fact, it's actually got a three-piece suite sort of bolted
like
to
a
it.
touring
Yeah, no,
car.
it's actually rather comfortable.
How did you find the car?
Well, funnily enough, that came from an American collection. It had been there for a while, and that was a car that came in beautiful condition. I mean, it looked wonderful at the time I actually bought it, unlike most of my cars, which Type 35 Bugatti, that took me about 7 or 8 years to complete. But when I first saw it, the guy who restored it, in fact, for me, said, well, you ought to come and look at it. And he took me down to the bottom of his garden, and there was an old shed there with what I thought was a steel ladder against it. And he looked at this and he said, there it is. That's the chassis.
That's the chassis. Oh, my goodness.
And we went from there.
And, of course, all the parts aren't there. Let's talk about
all the parts aren't there. None of the parts were there at the time.
What do you do?
In order for the car to have some originality, you assume or you look for the bits that go with that specific car. I mean, the interesting thing is, of course, I'd never driven a Bugatti in my life. So I was sort of assembling a car. I had no idea whether this was going to be the nicest car I'd ever driven or the scariest or what. There is something very nice about taking something that is really sort of lost and finding it.
Lost is a good word.
Yeah. And then finding it and putting it back and creating something or restoring something, and the line sometimes gets a bit sort of fuzzy.
We have to talk about your 250F. Not only how it drives in performance, but how it looks. Just
how it looks. I mean, it is the ultimate racing car, or perhaps for my age group. It was the thing that Fangio drove, and it just looks, it's so perfect. No one had thought about wings and downforce or anything like that. They just looked for something that just...
That's right.
You can get in, you can actually let the tail hang out, and you can feel like Fangio.
G-force,
That's the thing.
So how did you find that car?
It's an absurd story, really. I was looking for an ERA, 1.5 litre blown English racing car, lovely car. And I managed to find one. American owned it at the time. But he said, I'm only going to sell it to you if you take this other car off my hands, which was a 250F in pieces, of course.
Oh, really?
And I thought, oh, God.
Here we go.
Yeah, and I thought, no, I don't want to do this.
So you got the 250F by default. So you go through the 2 years of restoration, from parts to finished car. You get it out on the track for the first time. So what was going through your mind? What's that like?
It's a great experience. I mean, in fact, of course, part of the time you're not really enjoying that moment because you're thinking, are the wheels going to fall off? Does it feel right? Will it go around the corner? What happens when you press the brakes? And inevitably, when you do press the brakes, the car goes off to one side or the other. And it's all
so that first few times around, you're a little bit more technical than that. Back with more of our car crazy friends right after this break. Welcome back to Meguiar's Car Crazy, here with Nick Mason, the drummer for Pink Floyd. You have become really a spokesman, if you will. It's having such an impact on the hobby. I just want to thank you. Car craziest experience. I mean, you've had a lot of experiences. What comes to mind when I say that?
Well, I suppose when I went to the Nürburgring for the first time, I managed to hook up with Derek Bell and took me under his wing and showed me the way around the circuit. It's something where you need a guide. It's not a quick trip. You spend the day, more or less, going round, and then you just get this one-on-one training. And you're both sitting in the car. You know, he'll drive it for a couple of laps, and then you drive it, and he's talking you through it, and so on. And that was fantastic. It was less fantastic for the Hertz rental car people who'd lent the BMW in the first place. When we took it back, I think every single light came on. Oil, gearbox. You know,
is that right? Push it to the levels. Back into the red line. Your book, Into the Red, fabulous, fabulous book. One of the great car guy books, because you not only capture the history of these great cars, but your passion and the whole interweaving, it brings these cars to life.
It was fun to do the book, and it was interesting because we tried to sort of give it a particular point, which was to indicate sort of the way cars have changed. So we started with the Panhard, worked through the Bugattis, the Maseratis, up to more or less present day at the time.
It's one of those fascinating things in the book is you take it and you help us understand the performance, all the stats for every one of these cars. The book is out of print now. Is there going to be a third edition here?
We're definitely going to republish. Really? Yeah. And I'd like to add another 1 or 2 cars. So, I mean, bring it up to date.
Just fantastic. I can't recommend the book strong enough. And now you're a writer of note as well. You have a regular article in Octane magazine.
Well, I think after doing the book, I realized that actually I liked not only driving cars and polishing them and all the rest of it, but actually writing about them as well. So the editor of Octane, Robert Coucher, said, would I like to do a column? And I thought, oh, well, I'll do it for a little bit. And then I get more and more stuck into it. So I've been doing it for 2 years now.
Robert's the best, and he's the chairman of our Meguiar's Award Selection Committee for the UK here. So we have that great appreciation for the magazine. It's nice to read your articles.
No, well, as I say, it's fun, and also because the other columnists are fairly distinguished. They've got Sterling doing a regular column and Jay Leno doing a column, and so I like to sort of hang out with those sort of people.
The fraternity of vintage car guys. Can you put the whole experience into perspective for us?
The thing about it is that it encompasses so many different aspects. There are people who are restorers, people who want to get things back to perfection, other people who want to drive the cars, other people who... It's so many different things, but actually what you have is a group of people who really are custodians. There aren't enough museums to look after these cars properly. Most of them need such detailed work that you've got a sort of almost a museum system, but it's all privately done.
That's right. That's right. Just a fabulous time to be with you. It really is. We'll catch up with you again later on down the line when you bring out the next edition of the book. We have to let our viewers know about that. Can't thank you enough, Nick, for sharing your time with us. What a great car guy. Nick Mason, the drummer from Pink Floyd, and now a great spokesman for the hobby and helping different events draw more people that aren't necessarily car guys or music guys coming in and then having the experience of what it's like to hang around car guys. So we're all into growing the hobby, and you're helping that about as much as anybody I know. So thank you for doing that.
Pleasure.
Isn't he great? Back with more of our Car Crazy friends right after this break.
Let's find out how car crazy you are. The name Chevrolet is as American as apple pie and baseball. However, its founder, Louis Chevrolet, was an inventor, a car builder, a race car driver, and not from the United States. Can you name the country where Louis Chevrolet was born? Was it A, Canada, B, France, C, Holland, or D, Switzerland? We'll find out right after this break, right here on Meguiar's Car Crazy. We want to know how car crazy you are. The name Chevrolet is as American as apple pie and baseball. However, its founder, Louis Chevrolet, was an inventor, a car builder, a race car driver, and not from the United States. Can you name the country where Louis Chevrolet was born? Was it A, Canada, B, France, C, Holland, or D, Switzerland? Louis Chevrolet built his first prototype car in 1911 with Billy Durant and formed the Chevrolet Motor Car Company. He came to the United States in 1900 from Canada after growing up in France. But he was born in D, Switzerland in 1878. And if you knew this piece of biographical trivia, you must be car crazy. And now our host, Barry Meguiar.
You know, I love reading your car crazy confessions, particularly when they come from our female viewers. This one today comes from Christine Vesley, and she writes, I'm 17 years old and was brought up and weaned on street rods. When I was 6 months old, I went to a parade with my older sister Connie and my dad in his chopped and channeled Model A coupe with a flathead. When my sister opened the door, I rolled out onto the curb, and I've been a rodder from that moment on. We three sisters spent a lot of time cruising the country in the back of Dad's '33 Chevy Woody. Growing up, going to rod runs. My dad had a rod shop, and we moved from Long Island, New York to North Carolina for more room and more fun. This year I'm a senior at Trinity High School, and for my senior project, I'm doing a project I call The History of Hot Rodding, and a fine example of it. Other than doing the written report using Dad's hardcover books and old rod magazines, and a phone call to the legendary Norm Grabowski, I actually built one. My father coached me and taught me how to use his tools and machines, but I did 90% of the work myself, and wow, am I proud of it. It's a 34 Ford pickup body channeled over a Model A chassis. I built a homemade bed from 16-gauge steel, and it sports a tube-axle front end and a small block Chevy drivetrain. The only part that was stressful was that I only had 3.5 months to complete the project, so there were many, many late nights and total exhaustion after it was finished, but I got it done. I got an A in the project, and I'm very proud to be a car crazy nut. Christine Vasily. Well, thank you, Christine, for your letter and for providing conclusive testimony that not all car guys are guys. Actually, there are a lot of car guys who are very attractive ladies who have that proverbial gasoline running in their veins. They know their stuff and they know how to drive, and almost without exception, they're just like you, Christine, because their dad's a car guy and they love their dad. One of the best trends I'm seeing now is dads and moms driving across the state and across the country with their kids to attend a car show. When you go to car shows today, there are kids all over the place. I keep asking parents, is this your kid's first car show, and are you taking pictures? And they usually answer, no, this is not their first car show, and yes, we are taking pictures. And that's fantastic because they represent what the car hobby is all about and what it's going to be 20, 30, 40 years from now. And I have to tell you, this is a recent phenomenon. Kids were a rarity at car shows just 10 years ago. Your dad was special, Christine, because he kept you with him at the car shows when it wasn't in vogue to have your kids with you. The stereotype for car shows back then was all about guys and their cars. And there was your dad with you and your two sisters right in the middle of the action. And look at you now, an A student and a street rod builder. He has to be so proud. As the saying goes, you are a chip off the old block, and your story has made all of us just a little bit more car crazy. And for the rest of you, I want you to know that I personally read every car crazy confession that we receive. And you know what? Every single one of them is so, so special. If you haven't sent me your story yet, why not do it this week? Send your email to confessions@carcrazycentral.com. Thanks for watching our show this week, because this episode, and every episode, is intended to make you just a little bit more car crazy.